Hello, everyone. This is why people haven't been joining, because we hadn't started the webinar. So it's only, I was like, there's a low attendance. It's 8 people. And I didn't put the 2 and 2 together that we're 8 people. Anyway, hello, everyone. That's more reasonable in terms of numbers. Happy that you have come and attended it in person. It's always more exciting to have people in person and contribute the questions. So we'll get to that. I'll just wait a second until people join. And I shan't put today, I usually put in the chat box, we'll put where you're from, but what I wanted to do is leave the chat box open today for people to put their questions in that sense, to everything gets completely clogged up there. But I'm sure you're from all over the world, and thanks for joining, or whatever time zone you're currently in. I hope you have a better time zone than me. I'm in Bali right now. It's 5 a.m. in the morning. Santini's in Buenos Aires. Lara, New York. Shayna, North or South Carolina. That was confused. One of the 2 Carolinas. I think South. Gregor in Perth, I think. Michael in New York, I think. Eddie's in New York. And Matt is in good old UK. Whereabouts are you?
In Manchester.
In Manchester, UK.
God's own land.
I'm in the Patagonian mountains.
Yeah, well,
similar.
Have you been to Manchester?
Yeah.
And
I think they're twinned. They're twin Manchester and Patagonia mountains. I think they're twinned.
Well, yeah, but what do you have? The peaks? Are the peaks in Manchester similar?
Well,
Patagonia,
a couple of hills, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
rains a bit in both places. All right. Well, let's get going. Let me unmute not unmute. Wake up my phone. I've got a few notes on my phone. So thanks for everyone for joining. I'll just cut to the chase first of all. Questions come in the chat. I don't think you're able to unmute yourself in the first place as your participants. So yeah, don't forget that you're encouraged to participate in this. So please put your questions as things come up for you in the chat box, and we'll try and get round to as many of them as we can later in the session. Don't forget, none of us are medical professionals, as I understand. Anyway, maybe some of us are training or trained. I don't know. But anyways, this is anecdotal advice. So it's not advice as such, but, our own experience and our own thoughts about mental health and yoga. We are not medical professionals, and this advice should not replace your own doctor or medical consultant. Okay, we'll get that out of the way now. So this Yoga and Mental Health Conference is very close to my heart. I have been frank and open these days and mentioning that I have suffered with anxiety since I was, I said as long as I can remember, to be honest. And I'm sure that's a common experience, and increasingly this day and age, really. So this kind of thing does no good for me at all, actually. And I seem to keep putting myself in the same kind of position. You see, I'm better than I was. Anyway, I think we seem to, well, let me start with quoting the Bhagavad Gita, actually. And I like, there's a quote in chapter 6 that starts, the self is one's only friend and one's only enemy. And I think that anyone that's struggled with their mental health understands that all too well. And also, we seem to be kind of falling into this weird paradox where we should be happier with less on our plates, or in some respects, in terms of modern technology taking off the onus for struggle in daily life, etc. Living standards seemingly increasing, less and less of us on the poverty line, or at least, able to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves, etc. But we seem to be faring also worse with mental health. So it's a kind of happiness paradox, as I think James Kingsland in his Siddhartha's Brain, which is a great book if anyone fancies reading. A recent book on mental health, James Kingsland, and he's a meditation. He's someone into meditation, and he writes a book on psychology and mental health. And he mentions a couple of stats that I'll just go briefly through. So 450 people suffer from mental health or behavioral disorder currently. So psychiatric illness is one of the leading causes of ill health these days. Worldwide, nearly 1 million people commit suicide every year, which is absolutely tragic. In the UK, where me and Matt are from, 1 in 4 people will face some kind of mental health crisis in the course of a year. So 1 in 4 people, which is crazy. Chronic anxiety and depression being the most common. 6% of Britons over the age of 16 report they have attempted suicide. And then 7% of the world's population now, 404 million people, suffer clinical depression. 404 million people suffer clinical depression every year, with 4% of the people having anxiety disorders. So what can we do now? And of course, the work is done by ourselves. It's an inside job, but we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist with other people, so we have to do something together as well. So we come together today to see how yoga fits into this picture, what it can offer in terms of mind training. Is it stilling the mind, or then you have this kind of mindfulness practice these days, which seems to be a kind of different kind of thing. The mindfulness, a kind of open monitoring, as James suggests in his book. So, what kind of processes are we looking at in terms of mindfulness or stilling the mind, as in traditional yoga iterations? For me personally, it gave me a lifestyle, a rhythm of life, and a sense of context to my daily life. Gave me a reason to get up in the morning as well. So I'm going to open it up now to our panel. We have Lara from New York, as I mentioned, Shayna, South Carolina, Santina, Buenos Aires currently, but Australian native, Gregor Maley in Perth.
I'm not from
Matt
Perth.
in Man.
I'm living 4,500 kilometers away from Perth, on the Australian East Coast, as far away in Australia as you can get.
To clarify that, originally German native, Matt from the UK, we've mentioned that, Manchester, Michael Baidoo from New York, and Eddie, again, New York. So I really thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to come on, donating your time to do this. I really appreciate this, and let's see what kind of chat we can have today. So let's start off. Eddie, you have the privilege of starting today. Is there anything particular in the pattern or sequence and the postures themselves that might affect the body and accordingly the mind in a certain way? I know you've wrote some interesting stuff in your book, One Simple Thing, and I know you're studying right now as well along these lines. So do you have anything to contribute to that question?
Sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me to take part in this. It's an honor to be here with so many old and new friends, and I haven't seen Gregor in decades and decades. Nice to see you, Gregor. And yes, absolutely, this is a crucial topic for our times, and one that is becoming less and less stigmatized to actually speak about, because for a long time, in fact, still there's a lot of stigma around the discussion of mental health. I think when it comes to yoga practitioners, pretty much no one says, I'm super great, everything is awesome, I feel at one with myself, let's go do a yoga class. No one says that. Everyone who's coming to yoga has something that they feel there's something missing, whether it's spiritual or physical or mental or emotional, or you're not too sure what, you're seeking for something that just doesn't seem to be quite right with the fullness of your life. So you come to something like yoga or meditation or mind-body practice. So it's fair to say that anyone pretty much who is coming to do something like yoga, they are thinking or dealing with something. And a lot of those things are going to be mental and emotional, whether it's severe trauma, mild trauma, generalized anxiety, etc. In regards to, are there particular yoga poses or yoga sequences that can be useful for mental health? The answer to that is yes and no. It all depends. When it comes to generalized examination of the information processing that occurs with yoga poses, you can see that from nervous system activity, things that are forward bending shapes, whether it is a child's pose or lying on your side, curled in a ball, or doing a forward bend, these types of poses, generally speaking, can be soothing for the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response, the restoration or repair response of the nervous system. And asanas that are related to back bending, specifically where we're addressing the middle part of the spine, these are going to be energizing for the sympathetic nerves that are exiting from the spine in that area, so that we could say forward bend, generally relaxing, calming, backward bends, generally speaking, energizing or enervating. And then twisting positions, could be, in some cases, balancing for inner information flows from the right to the left hemisphere of the brain through the corpus callosum. So twisting, integrative, forward bending, relaxing, back bending, energizing. However, that doesn't hold true for every single person, and it doesn't hold true for every single body type as well. So while there are certain poses or patterns that, generally speaking, can be helpful for mental health conditions, we have to look at the person and we have to look at the condition, and then we have to start making either some educated guesses or going to the research which is available. Now, one of the hallmarks of yoga in general, and when I say yoga, I'm talking largely about asanas, pranayama, relaxation, and meditation, making up the wholeness of a yoga practice, is that it is a multi-modality practice. That means we're doing a bunch of things all at the same time, or maybe a bunch of things in succession that are going to have a global effect on our psychophysiology. So the mind-body connection will have a global effect. The research which has been done, where you look primarily at what happens if you only do asanas, you will see some benefits, especially in regards to mental health. But when you begin to add in the other facets of yoga, relaxation, meditation, and pranayama, along with asanas, then the effects become even more pronounced. So even though we could say, yes, you could do this particular sequence of these 5 poses for depression, you're going to want to make sure you know the person that you're working with, and you're going to want to make sure that you're incorporating other elements as well. And also, so for example, there are going to be different characterizations of the different types of mental problems that we have. So we have chronic anxiety, we have panic disorder, we have general anxiety disorder, which is like low-level chronic anxiety. Then we have severe social phobias. We have, on the other end of the spectrum, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and then all of the problems that come along with PTS, with post-traumatic stress. So all of those different types of disorders, or all of those different types of mental health conditions, are going to need different approaches. So for example, if you have someone who is bipolar or schizophrenic, you're not going to have them meditate. Already they are having problems perceiving and cognizing mental activity. There's something that is happening in a different pattern there. So you don't want to have them sit quietly, moving into their own mind, where they might get further lost in whatever happens to be going on there. So eyes open, dynamic practices could be good, because you want to get the body moving sometimes to the speed of the mind in order to start slowing the mind down. Chanting could be very good, certain types of pranayamas, but not hyperventilation techniques. And again, not having them rest in poses for long periods of time where they could potentially get more lost. So a little bit of dynamism, especially in the beginning, is good for those types of disorders. When it comes to generalized anxiety disorder, then you might want to have a mix of things. You would want to have some dynamic practices, some slow practices, definitely slow breathing practices, and as well complement that with some meditation too. So you bring in the multi-modality. When it comes to looking at what certain practices are doing physiologically, which is something I'm fairly interested in these days, a demanding practice, for example, a hot yoga practice, or an Ashtanga yoga practice, or one of the current vinyasa flow practices, because these are demanding on the body, they can help to release endorphins. They can help to increase serotonin and GABA and glutamate and all of these neurotransmitters that give us optimism and give us a feeling of hope and accomplishment and staying on task, a feeling of purpose, floods the bloodstream and floods the nervous system when these chemicals are released. So demanding practices have been shown to actually do this. And then restorative practices, calming practices, whether it's a yin type of yoga or a yoga nidra or a very slow vini yoga style practice, these can lead to the relaxation response of the parasympathetic nervous system, which also is going to have its own host of release of chemicals, which will begin to alter mood and shift mood. And the outcome of both of these things can be very similar. So for example, if we look at positive mental health indicators, what are some of the things that people say when they are feeling positive mental health? They have higher levels of compassion, of forgiveness, of a feeling of purpose in life, of gratitude, of goal setting. They're quite good with that. They're hopeful, they are resilient, higher levels of feelings of happiness, of optimism, of self-awareness. They have better social relationships, more engaged socially. They're able to self-regulate, which is one of the hallmarks of a yoga practice. The lack of ability to self-regulate, of course, is a massive problem when it comes to depression and anxiety. And there is a higher degree of life satisfaction as well. So when we talk about positive mental health, these are some of the indicators that can be measured and quantified. And a multimodality yoga practice shows increases in all of these types of things. Now, the last thing I'll say, to use up the final of my 15 minutes, is that how do you know which yoga practice then to choose? Are all yoga practices created equal? And the answer to that, according to one meta-analysis of basically all of the available randomized control trials that were out at the time of this study, showed that yes, generally speaking, yoga is good. And whatever yoga, in all the general outcomes of the different yoga styles are basically the same. So how do you choose? You choose based on your preference. The one that you like is the one that you do and will give you the best outcomes. And so there were two considerations. One was what you like, preference, and the other was availability. If the only thing which is close by to you or you can get to is this particular type of yoga and you do it, chances are it's going to work, because as soon as you start breathing, as soon as you start moving, as soon as you start relaxing, as soon as you start paying attention, things begin to shift. That which we observe begins to change. And when you begin to observe yourself, it begins to change, usually for the better. Okay, so I'll stop there.
All right. Fantastic, Eddie. Does anyone have anything to contribute to that on the sequences and the postures and how? And I think Eddie gave a fantastic synopsis there. Santina.
Yeah, I agree with Eddie on the bipolar practices, because I came to the practice and I was taking lithium because I was diagnosed as bipolar, and going into the challenge of Ashtanga practice just really shifted me up and made me enter the body in a way that I was so desensitized that everything started to move for me. And eventually, over time, just practicing and coming deeply into that felt sensation, over time healed. So I agree with doing the Ashtanga practice bipolar. I couldn't sit still. It was just an enormous overload of sensory memories and information that was just too much for me. So thank you for that, Eddie, because I didn't think of it in that way. So I appreciate how you form that for me.
You're welcome, and thank you for sharing that part of your personal history. That's amazing. Well done.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, I had a similar feeling, really. I couldn't concentrate on anything. Yeah, the only thing that would take me out of it was just to do something faster. And it kind of slow, as Eddie said, like doing something faster with the body, somehow, it kind of slows down the mind in comparison with, kind of speeding up the body. So just sitting and meditating really wouldn't have worked at the time. Yeah, in the end, I was also able to come off antidepressants, which I'd been using a number of years at that point, I think. Anyone else? Eddie, I was going to ask you if is there any precedent for this in any scriptural basis, or is this all from recent studies of yoga, or is there anything that was prior to this that said about the forward bending or the back bending or uses of yoga therapeutically? When are the first mentions of this?
There is a mention in I believe it is the Prashna Upanishad, that says, no, I'm sorry, it's a commentary on Mandukya Upanishad that says when the mind becomes very active, you should stimulate it in order to slow it down. And then when the mind becomes very dull, you should stimulate it again to wake it back up. And so vacillating between these two is where you can find calmness of mind, because we all know that if someone is really anxious or really upset about something and you say, well, just calm down, relax, man, that's the worst thing you can say to them. That's a good way to get punched in the face. So we have to know that calming down or slowing ourselves down or relaxing is in our body. So you have to do something with your body. You have to do something with your breathing. Take a few slow breaths, but you don't tell someone who's upset to calm down. That's not going to work. And so if we have a mind which is moving really fast and we say, just slow down, it's not going to work. You have to do an asana that will give some excitation to the nervous system and body for your mind to hold on to something, to ground into something. And then later on, you can move towards quietude. So there's a bunch of places where you see these indicators, but the scientific things, of course, this is a new Western language. This is not the language of the Upanishads. They called the parasympathetic nervous system something else. So, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else contributing to this? Yeah. Or shall we move on to the next question? We have a lot to get through.
Let's move on.
All right, let's move on. Gregor, so what's the relationship of breathing to the mind then? You want to say anything about the breath and the mind and how we can develop this, or are there any obstacles or dangers in the development of pranayama? I remember when I started, people always used to say, don't do any pranayama unless you have a very qualified teacher, because it'll send you crazy. Any observations?
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Adam, for having me, and hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Okay, so look, I start with recent discoveries in psychology. Obviously, if you look into things such as Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, psychology tends to now say there needs to be an approach that involves body, breath, and mind, because trauma is located not just in the mind, not just the old Freudian idea of analyzing the mind, but that in the therapy, the body and the breath has to be involved. Now, if you look at Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which is the defining text in yoga, in the stanza 132, you have the statement that the obstacles of yoga manifest themselves in body, breath, and mind. And because of that, you have you have an approach that involves asana to target the body, pranayama to target the breath, and meditation to target the mind. Now, in order to understand, or let's just go even further back, where does Patanjali have this view from? Because the Yoga Sutra is basically a crystallization of the Upanishads. Yoga Sutra is basically Vedic psychology. People often think it's physical training, but it's actually psychology, because the Yoga Sutra starts with the statement, yoga is the science of mind. That would be just an extrapolation of the statement, yoga is the stilling of the mind. So ultimately it's the science of mind. Yeah. And because the body is so much involved, the body needs to be targeted too, and the breath. So where does that actually come from? The third oldest of the Upanishads, the Taittiriya, has already in 2.2 to 2.5 develops this so-called Panchakosha doctrine, which is the teaching of the 5 layers, of which the first 3 are body, breath, and mind. And then the deeper 2 layers to make up the 5 are dealing with how you can integrate yourself, that you fulfill a greater purpose in life, and how you attain mystical experiences. And so if you look at the whole system in the Taittiriya Upanishad, you look at it as if the human being is like a set of lenses that are stacked on top of each other. And if they are all cleansed, then you can look down into the core of reality. You can see your deep self, for example. Now, trauma makes all of these lenses opaque, that we can't look through. And because of that, the process yoga is designed as a process to cleanse all of those various lenses. And so the outermost are, of course, body, breath, and mind. That's why we deal with those ones first. Now, the particular importance of the breath lies, I'm going to use the metaphor of water, H2O. So H2O has three so-called states of aggregate. Well, all elements have that, which are liquid, gaseous, liquid, and solid. And they depend on the level of energy in form of heat or kinetics that we introduce into the substance. So let's say if we have a block of ice, that is the crystalline structure, it's the solid state. And then we bring in some heat, energy, it will dissolve and it will become liquid. And then if we add even more energy in form of heat, ultimately it becomes gaseous. Yeah, so you have first ice, then you have water, then you have steam. And so similarly, yoga looks at the body, the breath, and the mind, which we could say that the body is the decelerated state of the mind. Yeah, let's say if you have a traumatic experience, that will ultimately decelerate and then crystallize in tissue. Yeah. And then if you have something, so it's held in the bodily tissue. And then if something is happening that triggers your traumatic experience, that adds energy to the trauma. It is then accelerated and it could lead to a panic attack. That means it appears again in the mind. Yeah. So now the important bit in this metaphor to look at the body, breath, and mind in forms of states of aggregate in physics is that in between a thought becoming a motoric pattern or a pattern of tension leading to a motoric pattern, or the other way around, like a postural structure to lead then again to a mental reaction, it has to transit through the breath, which is the liquid state. It's similarly like, steam in order to become ice has to become liquid first, and ice in order to become steam has to become again liquid. So the liquid strata we call the prana or breath. Hence the breath is in many ways the transmitter, the transmitting structure between the thought and the body. So that's why yogis put a lot of emphasis on breathing training, which we call pranayama. Okay, so that's the theoretical introduction. Before I leave that, please note that yoga does not accept the Cartesian dichotomy of here's the mind and the spirit, and over here is matter and the body, and the twain shall never meet. Yeah. So yoga says body, breath, and mind are ultimately the same thing, just expressed in a different way. Okay, so that's the theoretical approach. The practical approach is simply when we see that somebody has a panic attack, you notice certain respiratory patterns. Somebody will really breathe slow and shallow. Whereas, when you watch somebody sleeping, you can probably see from the way how they're breathing whether they are in a deep, dreamless sleep or whether they have a nightmare, just from the way how they're breathing. Yeah? And so yoga uses these observations to make an intervention and to introduce different breathing patterns. which could be slowing down the breath, which could be accelerating the breath. There's different ways of accelerating the breath. Typically Kapalabhati and Bhastrika, which have different outcomes. Then there are different breathing patterns that can make the inhalation longer, you can make the exhalation longer, and ultimately this leads us to some form of a breath retention. Obviously, we shouldn't start with breath retention, because if you force somebody to hold the breath beyond their capability, they are likely to have a panic attack. So often what happens is when pranayama is introduced, there is too early an approach on so-called kumbhaka, which is breath retention. So there are different breathing patterns with different outcomes, and we would take the student rather slowly through them. So you have asked about dangers. Well, basically, similarly as with asana and with meditation, you can overdo everything, and also we have to realize that one person's medicine could be another person's poison. So there shouldn't be like a one-size-fits-all approach. It needs to be gradually introduced. And the dangers in general would be obviously holding the breath for too long. Often students come and they think it's sort of like a Olympic discipline, and who can hold the breath the longest. That's of course a toxic approach. That's how we would introduce panic attacks. And then the other danger would be exhaling too long and too slowly. You could get heart trouble from doing so. And again, the reason why somebody would do that is that somehow they have in their mind has been implanted the idea that they should be breathing so and so slow to achieve a certain objective. So what's important is that, especially in the beginning when we start yogic breathing, that we are process oriented and not goal oriented, so it should be introduced as slowly as possible. And the student should be shown, this is where you are, accept where you are, and start there and gradually expand from there, rather than to come from achievement, wanting to get somewhere. So the most frustrated responses that I get is that, Gregor, I'm ready to give up because I can't progress, or I can't get to this and this goal that I have set myself. And of course that's the attitude that we want to let go of. It's not a question of getting somewhere. So it's this goal orientation that we need to let go of, and that's probably the only point where I would say, how pranayama is officially the fourth limb of yoga and asana is the third. And that would be the only reason why I could see that introduction of asana, of postures, could be helpful, because they help us to let go, hopefully, as quickly as possible, of that goal orientation. That's where I want to get to in my asana practice. So hopefully the asana practice shows us that we need to let go of that. And once we have let go of that, then it's easier to commence the process of pranayama.
All right. Thank you, Craig. That was fantastic. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? You think about it. I just mentioned to everyone that participants, that is, questions in the chat box. Nothing's come in yet. You're always welcome to put the questions in if anything crops up, so don't forget that. I was going to ask, and maybe I was going to ask Eddie, actually, particularly. I was thinking recently, writing a little bit online about the breath in yoga itself, in the practice itself. Now, previously, we know it was a ujjayi breath, and some people have mentioned the benefits of contracting the throat in terms of the stimulation of the vagus nerve. For me, I felt that the technique, when instructed in that manner, could cause some innervation of the system. Perhaps it's not done correctly, or the focus is overly on the sound. Anyway, it didn't. This kind of particular instruction didn't work well for my headspace, I think. More recently, Sharat Ji has mentioned free breathing, and we have that now in the Ashtanga modality. Eddie, do you want to say anything about yoga breathing in the practice itself? Is it Ujjayi or is it free breathing?
Within Ashtanga yoga? Well,
and then generally, maybe. I think it's an interesting adjunct.
Yeah, well, I mean, my feelings on the way the breathing is done best might not be in alignment with the status quo. The deliberate tightening of your glottis in order to make a sound, for example, over long periods of time could potentially not be good for the glottis and the epiglottis, and could it cause strain in the throat. This is something that, of course, singers know well, and they attempt to avoid the whispering sound. A whisper is the worst thing you can do for your vocal cords, basically, over long periods of time. Ujjayi, as I understand it, and maybe Gregor can pipe in on this as well, Ujjayi is formed from two words, ud in Jayi, and Jayi means victory or rising up, and ud relates to the Udana prana, which is the prana which is associated with Kundalini and the raising of Kundalini. It's associated with the spirit leaving the body at death, and associated with a bunch of interesting things. One of the seats of Udana is at the throat, in between the area of the collarbones. This is called the Kanta Kupa. So in the Ujjayi pranayama, which is a kumbhaka-based pranayama for the most part, the sound should be focused. We should be trying to make it from very low in the throat, which is hard to do, and not up here in the area of the vocal cords and glottis. Of course, all this structure is going to move, but this is the focus from the teachers that I study with in India about pranayama. And the breathing that is done in Ashtanga yoga, the instruction that I had received from Pattabhi Jois in the 80s and 90s was nose and throat breathing. He also used this idea of free breathing. He didn't use the word Ujjayi ever. And this nose and throat breathing, to me, the way that I teach it and I make it work for myself, is that I like to focus high in the nasal cavity in the area of the olfactory nerves, and then have that connection between there and the very upper part of the pharynx, where the breath first starts going into the throat. So you can actually keep your throat relaxed and open, and you don't have to tense the throat. And then the sound is created primarily from the resonance high in the nasal cavity and high up in the upper back part of the throat. And there are interesting structures that are being stimulated within there as well that relate to things you read about in the yogic texts, subtle chakras and nadis and things like that. There's a softness that stays in the palate. The soft palate has a particular chakra called the Talu chakra. It's said that when the mind merges in the Talu chakra, then you enter into the void, or the chitta enters into the void. So this softness that we keep in the throat and the palate is very important. And you notice that if you try to focus at the glottis, all those structures become tense. And then your face becomes tense, and then your head becomes tense, and then you're doing the opposite of yoga, which is creating tension. And so that's how I use that breathing myself. And it still makes quite a nice sound. And I have not addressed the controversy that you asked about, but that's my answer. I look forward to hearing what Gregor and Laura have to say about it.
And it's a good answer. Thank you. Gregor.
Lara, you go first.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Yes, I got excited because I've never heard anyone else talk about it that way, Eddie, but that's the way that I've been teaching the breathing, as long as I can remember. And I've worked with a number of singers a couple who almost left the Ashtanga practice because of the other way of instructing, which they couldn't do the practice. It was really affecting their singing careers. One in particular, opera singer. And so when I instructed, I use a lot of images about like almost breathing through the cheekbones, or the air permeating through the skin. So it takes away that stress that folks tend to go toward when they think it's this throat thing or cutting something off. And in my experience, it's very ephemeral, and it's almost like the face is breathing for itself, and you still get a nice sound, a much lighter sound. And like with anything in practice, it's a way of not holding on so tightly to the concept, to the practice itself, and just having this very like a cloak of awareness on it. And I find this really generally effective for my students.
Beautiful. And also, like if you're not making a lot of effort in something, there's no reason why you should be breathing really heavily. Like your breath is going to be a reflection of effort. If you're doing something easily, you don't need to huff and puff.
Gregor?
Yes, so I think I have been certainly in classes or in groups where let me just use the term ujjayi, where that was practiced loudly, almost it felt as in an attempt to sort of stake a virtual territory, yeah. So, or where there was almost like a competition who breathes the loudest, yeah. It was almost like a war cry or beating of war drums, stay out of my airspace. A couple of helpful ideas. So one would be the sound should be loud enough that you can hear your own breath, but not necessarily that you overpower everybody else's breath in the room. So when you hear your own breath and you listen to it, that sort of like forms a baseline along which it forms a thread on which you can string all of your asanas. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there is this beautiful sentence, all actions are performed by my prakriti, by my divine creative force. Only a fool believes to be the doer. And then if we trace that in the Upanishads, there's this idea of the ajapa japa, that is that the divine creative force moves you by pronouncing the mantra Soham 21,600 times a day, which means 15 times per minute. That's the average breath speed of an adult. And so in the Gita, there is this idea that you should realize that actions are not performed by you yourself, but there is a greater force that expresses itself through you. And that is most beautiful experience in the breath, because I can actually sit here and feel how I am being breathed. Yeah, because I obviously don't have to do it myself. Like at times I may be working, I might not be thinking about the breath. When I'm asleep, I'm still being breathed. So it's something else that breathes you. And so the reason why we just tune up the breath a little bit in the asana practice, make it a little bit louder, is to feel that there is a force that through the power of the breath moves us through the sequence of asanas. And that makes the practice then eventually become effortless, where you just step on your practice, you step on your mat, you start your breath, and then you're being guided, moved through the sequence of asanas, ideally without having to do anything, not exert any effort, but the effort becomes empty or effortless.
Right. Actually, that was a nice diversion, actually. And I think most relevant because a lot of people are still clinging on to this idea that the breath needs to be very forced and very loud. And, I think it's just very bad for the mind space, to have this kind of restriction here and a couple of hours a day, or at least it didn't do me any good. Anyway, Lara, I wanted to ask you physical assistance and how the modality might be used to restore trust. I know in recent times it's been problematic, but my crowning moment was with Bessel van der Kolk, and I interviewed him, and I was kind of like, have to mention that every time. And it went quite well, the interview, and I was trying to kind of go with him, and I mentioned, well, should perhaps we avoid physical touch then for, people having suffered trauma? Bethel's a trauma specialist. And he said, no, it's actually fundamental for them to resolve physical trauma. They do have touch that's affirming. What do you think about this issue?
Yes, if you get to interview him, you have to mention it every time.
That's it. Yeah.
Because that's very exciting. Thank you, Adam, for having me on this wonderful panel and for addressing this very important, relevant, and present topic. And even though we may not be doctors in this room, it's because we're not. It's very important that we are thinking about these things and limitations of our knowledge and our skills when we're with our students, so we know what we know and where we may need to refer out. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons and growth spaces that we can come into as yoga teachers. When I saw your question, I was like, he's like putting me in the very controversial place of like, should I say if we should touch students or not? Like, I'm not going to say that. And I'm not, but I'll say some things about touch. Of course, human beings need touch. So, of course, Bessel and others in therapeutic spaces are going to acknowledge that, especially now where there's a lot of fear around touching, because of a very kind of, suing-based culture, and because of social media, and then of course because of spreading germs and pandemic. So it's there's a lot of fear around touch. So we have to balance the positives that we can get from touch and also understand the risks that are involved. I myself remember my own personal experience of really feeling touch deprived. My first experience of that was in college. The first year at university, just being alone and not with my friends and not hugging. And I'm very much a hugger. So I can feel, in my own personal experience, and again in pandemic, just like how much touch is so important and how much it regulates the nervous system, which we know it does, to receive a long hug, because we are in co-regulation, and our nervous systems aren't working alone, but in an energetic field together. So we're impacting each other. And when someone calm comes into space with us, we can feel that. And we can feel that whether, we get that actual skin to skin physical touch or not. So I think there's other ways of being safely in space with people and giving a feeling of being with, of holding, of grounding, that may be just as good without actually putting hands on. So I think that's the first thing. It's like to know that. Touch, touch is our first sense in utero. We actually feel it first at our nose and our lips, and later on we explore touch in the womb as an understanding of like, this is me and this is you. So it's also our first sense of boundary, and of understanding kind of our environment and of separateness, and how far out I want to go. And later when we're born, again, it's like the mother is kind of, or the parent is kind of like us that attachment figure, and then the child goes out, and we go out, and then we come back to that nurturing touch. So it's very important in terms of boundaries and in terms of our growth. And of course, there's a ton of studies about children don't get enough touch when they're, from orphanages, and stunting of growth, and a lot of problems. So it's very important that we receive safe touch from a caregiver, a primary caregiver. But I think it's important for in the practice of yoga, which is to me about understanding self and learning about self and self-study. And so this idea of boundaries and understanding what my boundaries are is super important to me. And I think when we introduce the touch of someone else on top of us, as far as like giving adjustments and pushing us maybe past our boundaries, then that can disrupt understanding, like, where are my boundaries? What's going on here? What can I figure out here on my own? And of course, you're also getting touch with your hands on the mat. You're getting self-touch with your hands on your leg or wherever in posture, which is also very meaningful, and I think highly overlooked. There's a lot of that we can give ourselves. This whole time I've been like playing with my wax, and I just wrote something about like fidgeting and touch, but there's a lot that we can give ourselves in ways of touch to ground, to regulate our own nervous systems, and to explore in shape. And as a teacher, as teachers, sometimes it's enough to come beside, to stand beside someone and really affirm where they are in their bodies, in space, and be that person that's next to them, looking out at what they're seeing, and celebrating where they are. I think there are some great things around touch that do open up breath, and there are certainly times and places for healing and healing modalities with touch. But I think, as far as this conversation and us as yoga teachers and the Ashtanga community, it's something that we really, really, really have to think about and consider, because when the students are entering the room, it's already this student-teacher relationship there. And there's definitely a question about what kind of full consent someone is able to give in that setting, when they're already like, you're the teacher, and there's this like really urge to please that we all have because we're socialized this way. We want to do well. We want to make our teacher happy. And these are things that aren't really addressed or being addressed that much. They are now more, but even in relationship between the practitioner and the teacher, it's like, how much of this is being addressed, and how skilled, trained really is the teacher to be able to take on, understand things like transference, things like the student or practitioner, and I want to say students, feeling like that teacher gave me an adjustment and it opened up my world. They are like now God to me. I love them, and it's all about the teacher. And what does that do as far as my own like self-worth and self-discovery and ability to to realize that I can make change within myself, right? If I'm attributing that to the teacher or even to the practice, or even to like a certain move or posture, which may not be with me forever. So that can happen really quickly in our spaces. And I'm not sure how much training there is in our spaces for teachers to really be ready for that, and how to address that if it's coming up, what it does for us when a student puts that unwarranted reverence on us, because like we're not often ready for that, knowing how to handle that. And then, of course, if you add someone who is especially dealing with any kind of mental health issue, especially and I have no idea where I am with time. I'll just say this and then I'll step out. I'm not sure. But especially dealing with trauma, which is sort of my specialty and my place of focus, it's like boundaries are disrupted. There's a lot of issues with boundaries when there's been a trauma for many, many reasons. Because there can be a disassociation, folks can put themselves in very, sort of harmful situations because it's like, it's not happening to me. There is an inclination, as I think Peter Levine describes very well, to kind of recreate the trauma. So that each time, like maybe it'll be played out differently, to have that chance to play it out differently. And so because of that, there's this real blurring of boundaries. And also after trauma, we know that the prefrontal cortex really goes offline, or it's not as active. So that's the part of our brain that's really dealing with, social outcomes, like, is this appropriate, thinking ahead. And so you have lots of things in the mix there that can lead to a lot of not great outcomes in a yoga room with bodies moving around and touching, and when like really, really safe containers and like good conversations haven't taken place, which I don't see that we mostly have that set up. Maybe some of us do. I'm not really seeing everyone in our intake and how we're, maybe, interviewing practitioners before they come in and having conversations, and is this the right space, and like doing all that work. But basically, we don't know who's coming into our spaces, and it's not very often that someone's going to wear a sign that says, I'm dealing with a trauma right now. They might not tell you, and you might find out because a touch that they felt was not safe.
Thanks, Laura. That was great. Does anyone have anything to add on this subject? Santina.
Thank you for having me, Adam, and everyone else here. I'm very nervous, so if I get overwhelmed and start crying, I apologize. I just get nervous in these conversations. I just wanted to add here, it's what I imagine is Lara talking about the art of attunement within the teacher. Can the teacher develop this somewhat meta skill where they can attune to the student and everyone else in the room? And so it's almost like a kinesthetic emotional sensing of the rhythm, the affect, and the experience of the student as you watch them move, and whether you can attune to that and somehow create a contact boundary where you can assess how much that student and how expansive that student's access to their inner world and their body is. And I don't know whether as yoga teachers, we do that. So I'm wondering, you know, how we can learn that attunement within ourselves, because I know for myself, if I'm not attuned to myself in the room, everyone can feel it. So unless I drop into a space where I'm highly contactful with what's going on inside of me, nothing gets done. In fact, everyone just gets stressed. And it's being able to hold that deep chalice of support and container for everyone to have their own experience in the room. And that's very transformative for everyone, because it's almost like everyone in the room has a trauma of some sort, and they haven't been heard, they haven't been seen, they haven't been allowed to actually explore their own experience in their body. And for a teacher to have that capacity to move in and out of contact boundaries with the student is very, very transformative for the student's body, without having to push them into asana or crank them into something to have some kind of effect on their psyche or their body.
Thanks, Santina. Eddie.
Laura, what you said was beautifully and eloquently said, and I wanted to echo something Santina said as well. Also, I like the green tones that are changing in your room, Santina. Nice. Just to echo something that Laura said also, that when it comes to touch, and not so much speaking about this idea of adjustments, but just the idea of touch within teaching and the importance of human contact, that we have different types of learners and different ways of teaching. So some people do very well verbally. Some people do very well with a demonstration. Some people do very well with actually being physically helped to do something. And we can use all of those modalities with teaching. And with this idea that Santina put forward about us being aware of our own bodies and experience and presence, this is basically why in earlier times, a student would do a practice for, say, 12 years or so before they would start teaching something. And now we have the influx of 200-hour trainings, and of course, which I went through as well when I did a month at Shivananda in 1988. A month is basically 200 hours, and then you're set out to the wild. But in earlier times, you would spend a good decade or 12 years practicing something. You'd learn a lot about yourself, and you'd learn about what you were doing in that time before you started teaching it. So one of the solutions to the problems that are occurring would probably be to, don't rush into teaching. And when people say to me, if you could do anything differently, what would you have done? And my answer is I wouldn't have started teaching yoga. I would have just practiced a lot more for a long time. I thought what everyone said was really nice. And when it comes to also this idea of, last thing I'll say about, in response to Laura, also with touch, within the Ashtanga yoga world and other types of yoga as well, there's an idea about pushing people further, helping people go deeper into an asana. And always trying to go deeper and deeper and deeper is probably not terribly beneficial over the long term, sometimes even over the short term, because all you're doing is staying addicted to experience. And if you need to keep intensifying the experience that you're having, then you're not being present, you're not paying attention, you're just chasing after experience. And this is what we've already been doing in our lives already, so we shouldn't necessarily mimic that again in a yoga practice. We can assume that probably anyone who comes to yoga is traumatized in some form, because if you've been born, you're traumatized. And so some are going to be lower levels of trauma and some will be greater levels of trauma, but we can make that assumption when people come in. Yes, something is going on. And then the last thing I was going to say was, sometimes also when you want to reach out to a person and you feel that there's an openness for some physical contact, a hand on a shoulder, or if someone is really stressed out, a gentle hand on a back can be an indicator of where to breathe or where to relax or where to soften. And it doesn't need to be a push. It doesn't need to be an adjustment. It can be an indicator. And you can tell them before you do it. I'm just going to put my hand in your big toe right here and see what happens. Is that okay with you? And then they might say no. And then you say, I don't like it when people touch my toes. Can totally relate. I'm not going to do it. But a gentle indicator can help move prana, sometimes more efficiently as well.
I think we have a lot more to discuss on that one, but we maybe come back to that and see how we fare. As I think I'll move on to the next scheduled question, and maybe we'll come back to that at the end. Issues around how do we contextualize that, or how do we safeguard it? What about consent cards? I know those have been kind of started to be inserted into the yoga room. Matt, I wanted to, in fact, Matt is I'd say the instigator of this idea. I think he was the one that recommended we do a conference on yoga and mental health. So have to give dues to Matt for this idea, a fantastic idea. And he's also suffered his own difficulties with mental health, and he's spoken about it online in a condition that's called depersonalization. So I know that you've been going through some symptoms recently as well, and I wonder if you've got a few things to say about this and how yoga's helped you cope with this, Matt. Yeah, just unmute yourself there. And yeah.
Kaboom. Can you hear me? Am I coming through loud and clear? Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you, Adam, for inviting me to this thing. I guess we both came to the idea, didn't we, when we had our chat that time? So yeah, perhaps it was, yeah, both of us. So hello to everyone, and hello to everyone out there. I guess, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about my own experience with mental health, which brought me to yoga, and then a little bit how, yoga has helped, but it kind of, it didn't cure the problem, because, the problem has come back, and I'll get to that in a bit. So in my late 20s, I was going through what was my second kind of bout of this little known disorder called depersonalization. And I mean, when I've researched it, apparently it's kind of the third psychiatric disorder behind, I can't remember the other two, but it's third. It's third on the list, but not many people have heard of it. You say, I've got this thing called depersonalization, and they're like, well, what on earth's that? And I guess, depersonalization is an evolutionary tactic, as I understand it, that the brain employs in moments of terror. So if you were going to get knocked down by a car, your brain would switch into depersonalized mode, so you felt like it wasn't you who was getting knocked down. Just an example. Another I've read about is students going into exams. They experience kind of flashes of this depersonalization. It's these kind of high pressure moments. But the disorder is when you kind of get landlocked in the symptoms. There's no kind of real way out. And that's what happened to me. It first happened in my kind of early 20s. And then again in my mid 20s, late 20s, and various reasons, childhood trauma, going out and partying probably didn't help too, but yeah, and everything. So I kind of got into this, and it's the thing is, it's depersonalization is when you it's hard to describe it other than you don't feel real, and then that might sound a bit wacky, but it's not. It's absolutely terrifying, and I say to people, have you ever had a panic attack? Have you ever had a bad acid trip? It's like that. And it goes on, and weeks and months, and it goes on for a long time, and when it happened that kind of third time, I was just trying anything and everything. It's so intense and acute that you're trying every kind of thing, whether it's Western, whether it's Eastern, reflexology, flower essences. I was on antidepressants for a few years. Nothing seemed to kind of help. Yoga was just literally something in the list. I used to be a DJ, and the nightclub that I was working in, one of the people who worked on the bar gave me a number of a yoga teacher. And at that point, I'm like, yeah, I'm just a shit kicker from Manchester. I don't do yoga. I don't know what that is. I had no real kind of concept about it. And so anyway, I went along to this class, and yeah, it was Mike Nevitt. Yeah, and it nearly killed me. And I played a lot of football as a kid, and I kind of was quite fit, but going to this class, it was like, whoa. And I've no idea why I went back, but I went back for the next week. And yeah, I mean, slowly over time, it started, the symptoms started to recede a little bit. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So, I literally threw myself into it. It was a good couple of months in before a friend had said, what is it? What yoga is it? And I was like, because that blew my mind. I didn't realize there was different forms of yoga. I was like, oh, right, okay. So I have to go back to the teacher. What is this yoga we're doing, mate? And that's true. I had to go, yeah, it's Ashtanga. Oh, right, okay, nice one. So, and then, it's after, I don't know, maybe three or 4 months, I was like, right, okay, that's it. This is something that, it helps. And, I didn't have the science why it helped. I just knew that it did. And that's all I needed. It was the kind of the not the cure, but it helped more so than anything. So I can, as I like to say, I hung up my headphones and I jetted off to Mysore for a couple of months. And yeah, and then I came back, and yeah, I started to talk about my experiences with people. I wasn't shy in coming forward at all. I was completely open about it. I mean, I guess, when you've got something that's so acute, you just want anybody to help you who's out there. So I've always been completely open and honest about it. And I guess it gets lumped in with anxiety, it gets lumped in with depression. And people would say, are you depressed? I'm like, yeah, I'm depressed because I don't feel real, and because it's intense, so it creates anxiety. And I guess certainly with the Ashtanga being such a physical practice, the kind of physicality of it would kind of, in my head, the anxiety feeds off energy, and the physicality of practice, I would have no energy when I was lying down at the end of class, so it's like the anxiety became less. And so from that very kind of simple, in my head, simple science, the anxiety had no energy to feed on. So it became, less. And then when I got back from Mysore, I didn't want to be a DJ. I wasn't quite sure what I do. I'd not done my 200 hours. I never have done. And so I just, I set up a class. I thought, right, I'll just have to suck it and see, and that was maybe 23 years ago. And I guess to kind of put this, Adam and I had a conversation, didn't we? Was it perhaps last summer when we had did the podcast? And we talked about these things then, and then, ironically enough, well, not sure that's the right word. I'd just past that conversation, I'd split up with my wife for 10 years and done some really brutal kind of stuff at home, and the anxiety came back. And before I knew it, boom, this depersonalization was back. And the fact that I'd had it 2 or 3 times before, it was like, it didn't make any less intense. It was still, it was pretty secure. It's fucking horrible, sorry to swear. I mean, that's, it was that brutal. And, I was kind of, I kept on with my practice, and, I started to run a little bit. And I guess part of my question was about the medication aspect. And I guess, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm clean. I don't want to go down that route again because it's not helped. Or it hadn't helped in the past. And a doctor friend of mine said, you need to try it again, mate. You need to have a look at it. And so, I went and spoke to a doctor, and he prescribed this mirtazapine, which is a new form of the antidepressant. And, within maybe the best part of a month, the symptoms had gone right down again. And it was like, whoa, right, okay, I can get on board that. And again, I was completely open, about this journey that I had gone on, or was going on with people, with students, with people who come to my classes and stuff. Not that I'd stand at the front and start talking about it, but I wrote about it and do these little blogs and stuff. And I guess when you've got a yoga teacher stood in your class who's been completely open and honest and transparent about their own kind of mental health and problems, it kind of, I think for me, it's helped other people to come forward and talk about it and, bring it a bit more out in the open. And, I guess when you've got someone who you know has been through the dark night of the soul, it kind of, you know, it helps them to be perhaps a little bit more verbal and talk about it and feel, right, okay, this guy's been through it a little bit. Perhaps he can, you know, help me with my problems in some way, shape or form. And I guess that's been one of my own particular, whether it's a strength or whatnot, being able to help other people, because, you know, there's that sense of connection, if that makes sense, of having problems and being open and honest with it, you know. Yeah, I guess that's it in a nutshell. And, you know, I'm listening to Eddie speak and Laura and everyone. I'm like, whoa, it's all this science. It's blowing my mind. It's like, you know, I don't know any of this shit. It's like, wow, I need to watch the recording of this too. I need to write all this stuff down. So I've got the context of knowing the kind of the details and around them and why, you know, back to what I said, it just worked. You know, that's all I knew really. Yeah. Is anyone still there?
For me? Yeah, we're all here. Although I dropped out for a moment. And yeah, Michael.
Yeah, no, Matt, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that. Because there's a lot of points that you mentioned that I took note for myself. And one of it was anxiety feeds off energy. And it's a very important piece that you mentioned. And it sort of correlates to why even myself, I switched off to Ashtanga yoga, because it's done in the morning. And I'm the kind of person who wakes up with thoughts and with things in my head. So I'm thinking about like whether it's good or bad. If it's like a bad thought, I'm keeping it with me for the whole day until I clear it off. But having a morning practice such as Ashtanga yoga helps mitigate that, or even clears it out for me to where I can have more of a rational mind and be able to go through the day. And a lot of it made me think, because it's almost gets to that point where you start to think about yourself and you're like, am I wasting time worrying about a situation to where it's only minute, but I've created a big scenario out of it? Or do I make a better decision by taking action into it and helping myself to create a strategy or a plan to help fight it? And the reason why I bring this up is because how I got into Ashtanga yoga happened during the pandemic, to where when I was laid off within my position and my job, I didn't feel it was real at all. Like I almost felt like, okay, like now I'm out of reality. I don't know how reality really looks like and whatnot. And I'm in my head a lot. So being able to find something that was grounding, such as what you just mentioned, I feel that relation, and I thank you for sharing that.
Oh, yeah, nice one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Santina?
Thank you, Matt. I'm with you. I don't have any scientific evidence or education around Ashtanga or yoga. I'm just living proof. I am the evidence that the practice works. And I came to the practice as a heroin addict, and I was completely disassociated from my body and my experience and my emotions. And the Ashtanga practice for me was so physical that I was bumping into all of my emotions and bumping into all my associations and my memories. But what was so powerful about the practice was that I had to enter the body. I had to enter the body. And when I entered the body with that sensibility and that level of acuteness, there were moments in time where I touched a magnanimous current, like an omnipresent current within me. And that offered a point where I wanted to keep on going back to the practice because I wanted that. I was craving that moment, those moments where there was something else coming through. That divine essence was there for me. And it was only through entering the body through yoga that I got that. And it was really hard, but that fusing that fusion with that experience gave me almost like a divine spiritual romance with the practice and my body. And that's all I know about yoga, really. So I'm with you. I don't know whether I need to have all of the information. All I need to know
jargon.
Yeah, my experience is one of this consuming fire inside of me that burns all the dross, and I come back to the body over and over and over again. And that deep metabolization inside of me creates enough space in me for some kind of consecration. There's a dedication to myself in it. So I'm with you.
Well, I guess, yeah. Whoa. I guess for me, you know, I mean, all my mates were like, "Whoa, what's Matt Ryan doing? He's doing some weird crap. He's been to India. He's got cosmic, da 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 da." And it was like, it was easy for me. I stopped drinking, da 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 da, because I found something that worked. And the very fact that it worked got me back on the mat. It was, you know, it felt like, right, okay, this is something. And you know, they say that the sequence and sticking to it and doing it every day, the whole ritual aspect of it, you know, and the kind of, you know, the whole mind body component to it, it just works. So it was just an effortlessness for the discipline aspect of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You know, I'd get up, put the gas fire on, make the room warm, and get on with my practice. It was, you know, because I knew it worked. And, you know, I you know, not that it can work for everybody, but it, you know, I'll say to students when they come, you know, if you apply it, and, you know, it can help, it can surely help. And like you just said, living proof, I'm living proof that it's worked. And the fact, you know, a running joke with all my mates, you know, I've got a history of kind of doing this, a bit doing that, which is an ADHD thing, which we'll not go into right now. But, you know, all my mates were like, wow, he's stuck at, he's doing it a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, you know, now 23 years now. It's like, wow, they've finally given up on me that I'm not going to go back on the booze. And, you know, it's like, right, let's not ask him out anymore, you know. So, yeah. Did someone? Thank you.
Cheers, Matt. Okay, Eddie, say something?
Yeah, I think Gregor was in the queue first,
All right.
to use a British term.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt, for sharing that. I just want to share quickly that I had a very benign version of that. I grew up being basically like a spiritual junkie or a nirvana junkie. Yeah, like from my childhood on, early on, I was only interested to meditate myself into non-existence as quickly as possible. Yeah, I don't know where I got this idea from, but I spent my entire childhood and teenage years studying scriptures such as the Dharmapada and the Upanishads. And for me, when I was hitting yoga, I realized that I was totally disembodied, and it became an absolute adventure to actually become a physical being. You know, although I lived in a body, I was sort of like a brain which was just a collection of mystical experiences and scriptural quotations. You know, I wasn't a body. And it sort of struck me when my wife said to me, we met each other in Mysore. She said, "You don't seem to be the sort of person that would be attracted to such an intense physical workout." And it was then that I gradually reconstructed that I was on an adventure of becoming a body. And it was so beneficial for me to just become totally embodied. And it's an ongoing practice. Now I sort of have, in my spare time, I'm a bit of a bush ranger. You know, I operate machineries, you know, like lift heavy trees and rocks. You know, I live out in the bush, and just to become this body and to dare that and to be ready for that has become a total adventure for me. So thanks for sharing all of that. It's very helpful.
Yeah, Gregor, that was a very cool thing you just said. Just to respond to Santina and Matt about the science part, you definitely don't need to know all that stuff at all. It has no practical usage other than being a way to communicate with people who maybe haven't done yoga or need to know a reason why it might work. And there are a lot of those people in the world. And again, there are all sorts of different people. I happen to have an overly complicated mind. And so this stuff is entertaining and enjoyable for me. But if something works, it works. The proof is in the pudding. That's all, you know. And if you know how to make the pudding, that's even better. And you can give it to other people.
To just quickly comment on that as well. I had a feeling like what you were going to say, Eddie. So just like echoing that, and also wanted to say that with the science, I mean, science, I feel, is always catching up to our human experience. So it's just like trying to prove what we're experiencing is like provable. And I feel like with so many of the studies, I feel like are problematic anyway, because it's so hard to isolate a human experience and say like, this is the thing. And they're interesting if your mind is interested in them. But I think it's also important to view them, to note, maybe like study first, even how to like look at a study, because a lot of them are questionable anyway.
Thanks, Lara. Santina, do you want to talk any more about your experiences with using yoga for addiction? I know you've said a couple of things. Do you want anything else to add on that front?
Yes, there's a lot. So again, I don't have any scientific evidence, and I'm not a scholar in this area. I only have my own experience. And what I understand about addiction in myself is that it's a deep existential fear of loneliness and meaninglessness and isolation and emptiness. And so there's a spiritual, unrecognized spiritual need in me for something more. And I use lots of substances and lots of behaviors to try and fill that void. And of course, nothing worked. And I think, addiction is multifaceted, the practice is multifaceted, and the solution is multifaceted. I don't think that just going to yoga is going to fix the addiction. But having said that, it is really coming to terms with, you are searching, well, me, I don't know about everyone else, but for myself, I'm searching for this deeper connection within myself and with something greater. And the practice offers that because, like I said, you have to enter the body. And when you enter the body, something happens. There's a numinous experience that happens when you enter correctly. Now, for many years, I didn't enter correctly. I was just chasing postures, chasing more and more and more experiences and more, which was good because it got me off the drugs and it sorted it out. And then eventually I was still in addiction, still chasing that feeling of addiction, that feeling of filling a void. But eventually the practice for me had to become a dedication. So I had to consecrate the practice in a way. And that meant dedicating myself to a deeper relationship within myself and a deeper relationship with the greater and a deeper relationship with life. And that came about through every little struggle with addiction, finding moments of spaciousness. And you find that in the practice. If you're very attentive, you find moments of spaciousness in the practice, and then there's a calling to come home. It's like, oh, that's it. That's the feeling I want, that moment of just, I'm home, I'm home. And then you're out of it again, and then I'm home, I'm home. And when you say yes, those tiny moments of yes, I'm home, there's a consecration and a dedication to something greater. So it's not just going to practice to try and sort out your addictions and try and sort out everything that's going on in your life. It's a calling for something more. And that's a process that takes time. That takes time and dedication and trial and error. And for me, therapy, I had to go to therapy for many years to actually interface with parts of myself that were so dispossessed and estranged. But it is finding those small windows of expanse in your practice and in your daily life that get you out of that emptiness, that unworthiness, that isolation. And I suppose also the Mysore room was helpful in that sense, in that the community and my teacher holding a deep chalice and a deep container of support for me to be seen and to not be isolated and to be heard and to be held. But that's only one part. That's only one part. You really need to take it to those deeper aspects of yourself. I could say a lot more, but I just get confused, really.
That was great. That was a good start. And, you know, again, all these topics are, you know, just a tiny little drop in the ocean, really. But, you know, some more food for thought. Anyway, moving on, we have a time to keep. Michael, benefit with a specific person. I know that, well, you've had mainly Eddie as your teacher. So is there, you know, a specific kind of relationship with a person that draws something special out of you, and how do you contextualize this? So you haven't really had well, I don't know whether you would call Eddie your guru, but you know, how does it relate to how does it relate to
I already feel badly for him enough. Yes.
Yeah, I know. There, go, Michael.
He's my head coach of Ashtanga yoga. That's the way I refer him as.
There you go.
but no, for me, the way to start off, I think the relationship mostly starts off with, just like what Eddie said earlier, the style of learning and the style of teaching. Because if it doesn't connect, then you're not going to have a good relationship with your instructor or the student. I think for me, when I first started Ashtanga yoga, I needed more sort of like a serious adjustment within my life. So because of that, I had to seek a serious teacher, which was Guy. And then from there, I gained that, okay, I'm serious. I want to make that transformative move for myself. And then from there, I got passed off from teacher to teacher to teacher. But now I'm with Eddie Stern. My main focus now is how do I maintain my practice within current society now? Like now that the pandemic is gone, now that I could go back to the office and practice my jiu-jitsu, how do I maintain Ashtanga yoga into my life? And that's why I have Eddie as I had as quote unquote my head coach. And for others as well too, like I wish they could have that same style of relationship where they can be open, because there's a sense of relation, like qualities that we look for a relationship. I think the first one we're looking for is trust. And the trust in the sense that we're literally giving our bodies away to our instructor because we trust their level of knowledge. For me, I'm a very cynical person because I practice jiu-jitsu rigorously and I work a lot. So for me, to give my body away and say, Eddie, do whatever you want with it means a lot. So for me, it holds a particular value in that sense. As well as looking at, in the sense of like either having a multiple teacher or a single teacher. For me, at first I felt the need of having multiple teachers because I was fairly new. So I was advised books. So I saw the books as, okay, these were my teachers at first, because I'm still getting to realize what relationship that I want to have with my instructor, or what's my purpose coming into yoga. Because I knew before I didn't like the life that I have, nor did I like the anxiety that it came with. So I wanted to change that lifestyle and bring it into a new lifestyle. Actually, one funny thing that we have Gregor here, because I have one of his books. His book is one of the books that I read starting out. So this is exactly what I mean, is that like, if you're starting out as a student, I feel like use that time to explore and visit which instructor do you like best. It doesn't mean that The moment you go to that one studio, you're stuck with that professor for the rest of your life. The reason why I personally now I've gotten to the stage where I've settled for just one teacher or one instructor rather than multiple is mostly because there's only so much that I can focus on in a day. Imagine, for example, I was to go to different tours, and I went to an Eddie Stern, a Gregor, a Shauna, a Santina, and a Lara, and I learned different aspects from them. And I was like, okay, no, I'm going to learn this from Eddie, I'm going to learn this from Gregor, this from Shauna, and whatnot. I'm giving myself a little bit of information overload. And to a sense where I can't really focus, where I can't be very process oriented, to where I create goals that I'm probably never going to accomplish. And this is something that Gregor mentioned earlier within his speech, was about being more process oriented and knowing what's best for you, rather than creating an impossible goal, saying, you know what, I'm going to hit third series. If I get to learn the secrets from all these teachers, they'll show me the secrets eventually. And that's not always the case, because we have to look at what's the reason that brought us into this practice in the first place. We're looking for some sort of healing. And that's what yoga is. Yoga is for healing. So if we're just using it as like a goal setter, just to hit our accomplishments for to write on the wall, then yeah, go right ahead. But I think it depends on your purpose coming in. And from there, I see it more as like a therapist, because Eddie's someone that I open up to. Whether I'm having any injuries and whatnot, I'll tell Eddie, hey, my knee's feeling kind of funny from jiu-jitsu. But I can't expect every yoga instructor to have the same answer, because I've had the relationship with Eddie for a prolonged period. So it's almost like a doctor in a way. Like we all have our go-to doctors, and we go to a hospital, and we sometimes we may not feel comfortable when the hospital says, okay, hey, your prescribed doctor is not there, but we have a substitute. It's almost like that with the yoga instructor. Like even though it may be like a cool instructor and whatnot, I still feel like the yoga instructor still has yet to understand my body, but they see me as a student. So the level of knowledge that's going to be prescribed to me is going to be on a surface level, but it's never going to be in a deeper level to where I can learn more and use that to intertwine with my personal life, to use it as a benefit to begin a process of healing. As well too, constructive feedback. I think for most yoga instructors, I mean, a lot of them are gentle, warm souls. So I wouldn't expect to get the same feedback from everyone when I start my practice. Like if I was to go to a random class for the first time, I'm sure it's going to be a positive feedback. But after a while, like practicing with that one Pacific yoga teacher, I may get that specifics. Like, okay, like I feel like you're cheating on the breath a little bit within your Triang Mukha Ikapada. And from there, I can see that, okay, yeah, like he knows me very well. He knows my tendencies. Like he knows what I would cheat myself on. He knows what I would shine on and whatnot. So it's almost like a parent. Like you're saying, hey, watch me grow through this Ashtanga yoga practice. But by having multiple parents, you're only seeing certain experiences of your life. Whereas having one teacher seeing you grow from the first time you started from primary series, squeezing your body into that Marichyasana D, to where you're now able to do it, and you do a Navasana and you feel confident about intermediate and whatnot. It's a great bond. It's a beautiful bond to have that with you as you go within your journey. And also thinking about it, like I know I sort of shut it down in the beginning, but I think right now we've gotten to a modern era where we put that term guru out of the picture. I think now I see it more as a mentor or as a coach, because I feel like right now in the point of life, like if we can develop a conversation with our yoga instructor, then we develop the confidence within ourselves to really point out what we really want within our lives. Because if we're coming into that door, to that yoga room, not knowing what we want, and we're expecting someone to dictate us what we want, then we're creating an issue because the teacher doesn't know us at first. There's no level of understanding at first. And that's why I agree with Santina, with the interview in the beginning, getting to know your student and then getting to realize, okay, you know what, what's the best that I can provide to this student? Because maybe the student is just trying to get into yoga because they're enthusiasts of yoga. Maybe they're trying to get into yoga because they want to start getting their time management together and whatnot. But all of this, it takes two to tango. So eventually the teacher's going to have to listen, because the teacher is always learning as well too, which leads to my next part, because the benefit of having one teacher who's dedicated to the practice is that you're having somebody who's on the path where they've never stopped learning. Eddie mentioned earlier that yes, there's different levels of years of experience behind yoga teachers that we may have currently today because of RYT training and whatnot. Now, previously, just like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it takes 10 years to become a black belt. Whereas right now, there's an RYT to become a yoga teacher. So for me, the level of experience means a lot, because as a student, I'm looking to learn. But as a teacher, I'm looking to learn more challenges that I haven't learned yet that I could apply to my repertoire. And with Eddie meeting different clients from time to time. Like for me, I'm an athlete who likes to discipline myself and whatnot. But it might be different from another student that he may have within his shala or within his temple and whatnot. So all of this is a challenge for Eddie as well too, for him to learn. Okay, you know what? These are my style of students. Not everyone is going to be ready to ascend to certain asanas and postures, but he's getting to know more clients so he can be more relative to new students. You may have a student where they might have issues within their back or their knees, but because Eddie has developed this experience with Michael in the past, he's developed to gain the knowledge to know, okay, which level of effort can I push towards the student? Because for me, I like someone who can push me to my limit, because I know myself and I'm already telling myself, no, I can't, but I need someone who says, yes, you can. But if I have a level of multiple teachers, I might have different responses. Whereas one may say, don't push yourself too hard, but yet I may need that effort for me to push myself. And you might have a teacher who might say, you know what, I don't think this style of yoga, I might recommend this style of yoga to you. So now it's like you're having a set of different doctors that are giving you different prescriptions. One is telling you, hey, you should go on the meds. The other one is saying you shouldn't. The other one is saying, hey, you should just diet. And that will fix all your problems right there and then. So from there, it all depends on what the answers that you like and the doctor that you would like to work with. Because at the end of the day, like based off my experience, I started out with my jiu-jitsu teacher as my first Ashtanga yoga teacher, where he taught me sun salutations and taught me like several of the books to read to get started. But he only knew so much to where he redirected me to another teacher. And that's something that I would always advise to yoga instructors, is that if there's an area where you don't know or you may not feel comfortable within that answer, there's a wide network of yoga teachers out there that can help as well too. I think this is what creates that union behind different yoga teachers, is to say that, hey, I honestly don't know this subject, but I could recommend you to this yoga instructor that may give you more insight into it. Because I feel like once you close that window down and says, you know what, I don't know it, or that's it, then you sort of have that student stuck in the lingo of, I still want my question to be answered, but if I can't get it from my instructor, who else should I seek it from? And that's when you start losing that source. So I feel like from there, yes, the moment you get that client or that one person, yes, raise them well. I mean, you can run to the relatives like, hey, I have an aunt or uncle instructor out in the West. You could try it for a week if you're traveling out West. And that's what I do with Eddie. Like I'll tell Eddie, I'm on a business trip. I'm heading over to California. In LA, do you know any yoga instructors that you would advise me on? Because I want that same style of practice that I get from Eddie within New York, within California. I wouldn't want to change my practice. So from there, like through that development, I've grown to realize that if you're starting at first, yes, try out multiple instructors, get the feel of which personality fits you best, or which goal or which intentions behind that yoga instructor fits you best. You find it, and then from there you stick with it and you grow with them. And if you have any questions, there shouldn't be any reason why for you as a client should hesitate to ask questions to the instructor. It's almost like a student in school. If you refuse to raise your hand and ask questions, then you're doomed to assume that your question is answered as is. And if you don't have that question answered, it's going to linger in the back of your head forever and ever. But at first in school, you're taught with multiple teachers, and then you decide, who's my favorite teacher? What's my favorite subject and whatnot? And I think that's how their approach should be, like for anyone new. It shouldn't be much of like, okay, I'm the guru, I'm the end all be all, because I think that history is sort of dead, in the sense that it's almost like saying, okay, if that person knows it all, then I can just read this book, complete it, and then go off to another book, because that's all I've learned from this one person. And that shouldn't be the case. So it's always like an endless point of students learning and the teachers also learning, but eventually the teachers teaching the student to learn more about themselves and to gain this self-awareness, where they're not only confident within their bodies, but they're confident to communicate about their bodies to other instructors, to other yoga teachers. So where I can go to London and say, okay, like, I'm comfortable with this level, this is my levels of practice, and this is what I know, this is my level of injury and whatnot. I don't need that much assistance in this area, and I'm good to go. But I think, again, it all comes from the student as well too, to gain that confidence. If you're confident to get that adjustment, then say it. If you don't, if you're confident not to get adjusted, then speak it. But again, people can't read your minds unless you speak out. And from having that one yoga teacher, building that confidence to communicate, it should help build you more confidence to speak out to others if you do enter other yoga shalas and temples or having multiple teachers.
All right, that was great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, always a pleasure, Michael. Thank you. All right, we're running out of time. There's a question in the chat box around community, and the Ashtanga community is a good one. And actually, we have Shana scheduled to speak a little bit about the class situation and the community and what we can do there to, to make it better, or what are the pitfalls of the possible danger points for that. Shana.
Hey everyone, I'm Shana and I am in North Carolina, and I look at the intersection between social justice and yoga through a lens of intersectionality. And so my question was about the community, which I feel for the most part, the yoga world is desperately and really failing at and not doing very well in this area. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So when it comes to community, there needs to be a level of safety. And safety does not mean the lack of that uncomfortable things don't happen. It means that you feel brave to be who you are within this space. And without this sense of safety and bravery, the yoga simply doesn't work, because we cannot access our higher mind. At some point, the work of the yoga ends if someone does not feel safe within that community, if they don't feel seen, if they don't feel that there is a representation of themselves within that community. At some point, they do not have access to the higher mind and what they really need in order to continue on up the path of yoga and up into the higher limbs. So what are some ways we can do that? Someone talked about in the questions, they were asking about teachers saying things that were very triggering. And I said, well, that's because all teachers really need some trauma-informed, trauma-conscious training. That type of thing is going to help people to feel like they're safe, because we bring the toxicity from the culture at large into our yoga spaces. Yes, we can say stuff like, well, if we all just practice ahimsa, well, we won't hurt each other. But if you're bringing the cultural mindset into the space of yoga, which you will do, and you're not being very mindful of how you speak and how you interact with people, then you will start to have these toxic triggering things happen. So we need a safe environment, and getting trauma-informed, trauma-conscious training will definitely help with that. Another thing that helps is there needs to be diversity within the environment. If people do not see themselves within the environment, they do not feel safe. And this is a big problem in the yoga world, because most yoga studios, especially in the West, tend to have the same type of people in them, the same type of bodies from the same type of backgrounds, with the same type of skin color. Tend to be in most people's yoga studios around the world. So that means that within your Sangha, within your community, that you don't have a diversity of voices, of people who are able-bodied and not, people who are trans, people who are Black, people of color. You don't have all of these different voices within the yoga world. They are desperately missing in most people's yoga studios and in most people's classes. And so without these voices, it's really hard to create environments that feel safe for everyone. What happens is we start to create these containers that feel safe for only a certain type of person, without even knowing that that is what we're creating. And so if you teach in a yoga studio, or you are a part of a yoga community that is not diverse, then you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge that there are voices missing, and that those missing voices from the room, it has a huge effect on the type of communities that you are building from day to day. So if you don't have a very diverse community, it needs to be acknowledged, and steps need to be taken to try to bring in some diversity, but that's a whole nother discussion. Transparency. Ashtanga, I think, has a huge problem with transparency, meaning like having a clear way of understanding what is happening, what is going on, what's accepted in the community, what's expected in the community. And I think we really missed an opportunity to create a very transparent, non-hierarchical structure within the Ashtanga community after the Patabi Joyce accusations and scandal and all of that. I think that was a time when the Ashtanga community should have all come together and started to create a structure that was non-hierarchical, that was transparent, that was clear, and had a very clear way of people speaking about the things that were happening to them, and a very clear way of that information being transmitted within the community. And we completely missed the boat. It did not happen. It's one of the reasons why I don't do much within the Ashtanga community these days anymore, because I got to the point where it's like, I'm not going to sit here and act like this elephant is not in the room and it's just business as usual and let's just keep going and act like this thing's just never happened. We really missed the boat in creating this very transparent structure to the community of Ashtanga and to the organization of Ashtanga. And then non-hierarchical, as Lara already talked about. When we're coming into a room and there is the teacher and the student, this immediately has an effect on the person. Anyone who knows me knows that I can talk. I can run my mouth, and I tend to not be afraid to speak my mind. But I'll tell you this, when I went to Mysore and practiced with Shirai, I was terrified of talking to him. And this is never a problem I have ever had. And yes, I'll go ahead and say it. I've had a very bad adjustment from Shirai that would not have happened if there had been a way made for me to really openly to speak with him. And if I hadn't had that whole teacher-student hierarchy that just arose in me and took my voice away from me. And this happens when we don't feel like there's a clear way, path for us to communicate within our community. We feel voiceless. And there were many times in India where I felt voiceless. And so there's that right there. Open lines, channels of communication. And we also need to be able to have autonomy, to be able to be involved in the decisions that are happening around our body. And this can only happen when the teacher actually knows us and who we are and understands us and has a relationship with us. And again, this is a big problem in the world of Ashtanga. Yes, there are some beautiful times where people have this one-on-one relationship with their teacher, but a lot of times I still see this kind of hierarchical, you got to move through like 3 or 4 people to get to this person to be able to say these things and to be able to really get to know your teacher and have a relationship with your teacher. And so communities can be great. Humans, we co-regulate each other. And we've already talked about the fact that humans, we co-regulate each other. But if we're in these communities where there's hierarchical structures, there's no transparency, there's no clarity, there's no real conversations that have solutions regarding some of the problems that are happening within our community, then we create these communities that are toxic and that basically just reflect what's going on in the outer world. The same racism makes its way into the community. The same toxicity around body awareness, as someone was talking about in the chat, all of that makes its way in. The same voicelessness that I know a lot of people of color feel out in the world, it just makes its way right on in when we don't have a community that has transparency, that is not based on hierarchical structures, where people know that there's a way for me to speak and to be heard and to be seen, and that I will not be shamed once I say what it is that I'm going to say. And there won't be any like people trying to repercussions and people trying to get back at me and cancellations and all these things that happen within the community. So yeah, I think the Ashtanga community and the yoga community at large has a long way to go when it comes to building sanghas that are effective and that feel safe, and that can really help all people when it comes to their mental health, not just people who look a certain way and come from a certain community. All right, there are my words. Thanks.
Yes. All right, ladies first. Lara.
So like I went before Gregor before. You okay? Okay. Just briefly, first I want to just thank you, Shana, for not leaving us completely and adding your voice to this space. I know that we've talked a little bit about your conflict about being in any way in the Ashtanga conversation. So I appreciate your bravery and being here, and I think your voice is important. So I know we're going to do a panel together in spring, and I hope you'll keep being here. I just wanted to very briefly reflect on another part of that person's comment in the chat, because I think it's very important. We will not be able to talk about it tonight, but I think you cannot have a discussion on mental health without at least saying that mental health is not just an individual problem or occurrence. It occurs within community and society. And so there is the way of going in, of working on the self. And then there's the way of others of us who may have more capacity at that time, going out and working on the things in society that are causing the internal disruption in person. And there's a lot of reasons for that these days. So for another discussion, but I think that really has to be validated, that there's a lot of reason to be angry and sad and feel anxiety in the environment that we're in.
Very true, Laura. Gregor.
Yes, so Shane, I want to thank you for everything that you have said. And yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. Might be an idea to actually do a panel that deals with all of these issues that you have mentioned. I'm in total support of everything that you have said. And I see actually everything exactly the same by how you have said that. I think that there is a huge problem. I think that the Ashtanga culture missed a huge moment in which all of that was brought up, that we could have cleaned up our act, and that hasn't happened for various, ultimately, power mongering and who takes the big piece of the cake. I just want to focus quickly on one issue, and that is stratification and hierarchy in yoga culture. I think that is a huge problem. And I think what's really happening is that if a teacher goes out there and struts their guru potential, their desire to be adored by large crowds while standing on a stage, it's reflective of a narcissism, which is reflective of an early childhood wound, that you haven't been loved enough, and that's why you have to like stand now and be adored by the masses to be the great guru. I think it's rather embarrassing if somebody actually does that. And I wondered long, why are people adoring somebody like that? And I realized that it's because they managed to live their own narcissism by facilitating somebody else's narcissism. So they process their own narcissistic tendencies by enabling the narcissism of their leader. I think it's really, really important if teachers see that tendency to develop in their classes, that they do something which I call self-humiliation, yeah, and or to use a plain speaking English term, you have to make an art to make an ass of yourself in class. so that students stop doing that with you. Yeah, it's actually really, really easy for a teacher to stop the process of stratification. Maybe it's something that has to be included in teacher trainings in the future, how you do that, you know. So I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart that you brought up all of these issues. They're really, really important. Thank you.
I had a question for everyone regarding this topic, and this is just from my understanding, because I'm like an Ashtanga baby. I only have 2 years of experience. But if there was a community that we could use as a standard, what community would be should Ashtanga move towards to, and why? Because I'm not too familiar with communities. So if there was like a community that I should be looking at as the target to where Ashtanga yoga should be, what community would it be?
That's an awesome question. I know that we're pretty much out of time, and before I make the comment I was going to make, maybe Shana wants to speak to that.
I think we need to borrow. I think we need to pull a little bit from everywhere and create what it is that we want to see within our community. We can look back into history, but we also have to move forward into the future. And I think we have to figure out what that looks like and how to do that. I think we cannot really pull from one community or era and use them as an example, because there is evolution, and there are things that needed to evolve from the old way that we did things, that needed to come into the future. And we also have to look to the future. So I think that's actually the exciting part, if we embrace it, is actually sitting down and seeing what could community be for us. How can we take some of the beauty of the old guru shishya relationship and then bring in this modern age and bring it together in a beautiful way? I think that would be a great thing for, I don't know, a group of directors at Ashtanga, I don't know, to sit down and start to formulate. But I don't have a particular one place to look at. I think it should always be moving and growing and changing and like morphing as we all move and grow and change and morph.
Beautiful, as was everything you said earlier as well, Shana. And, you know, I think that this is what I was going to say before, but any community that identifies and forms a narrative around itself based on one thing being done only in one specific way is going to become problematic at a certain time, because it sets you off against the rest of the world, and it sets you off against change and input and dialogue. So, you know, it's also possible that this idea of there actually being one Ashtanga yoga community doesn't exist, and probably it hasn't existed for a long time. Every time there's a new generation of practitioners, they are their own generational community that see things in different ways. So I've never felt in the 30 years that I was involved with this particular practice, and of course I do a lot of other things too, that there was one cohesive community. So maybe it's up to all of us to learn things the best we can, and then stay true to our experience of what has been helpful and beneficial, and then grow our own tiny little communities and fashion those communities within our own vision of what we've understood thus far to be authentic to growth and transformation and healing. And then we have these tiny little pockets of people around the world creating these beautiful little loving, supportive, safe communities where healing can occur. And it doesn't necessarily need to answer to the same way that another community does, or another structure does in another country that might not be relevant to our own experience. So, but thank you for everything you said. And I really look forward, Shana, to hearing more about what you have to say about all of these topics in your discussion with Lara. I will definitely be there. The one thing I was going to say was that coming into this particular panel with the idea of yoga and mental health, I wasn't thinking so much about Ashtanga yoga specifically, because I don't only think about Ashtanga yoga specifically. And I just put it out there for the people who are very devoted to Ashtanga yoga and love it, that that's a wonderful thing. But that every time we use language like calling it the practice, the practice, the practice, which people do all over the world, it has this tinge to it that here's this special thing that is, you know, here's this special thing, you know, that I do, or the special thing that people do. How about just calling it a practice? Because really any practice will work as long as it's suitable for you. And if we started to switch our language and started saying, you know, a practice, I started doing a practice and it really rocked my world, you know, and every morning I get up and I do a practice and, you know, that's how I stay centered. Then it doesn't take Ashtanga yoga and put it on this pedestal of saying the, because as soon as we use this, the article of the, and define it, we set it apart. Whereas maybe it's just part of this larger ecosystem of yoga. It's this larger, it's one part of an ecosystem of a way of knowing who we are and then figuring that out and then living by it. So I vote for, and not everyone of course will agree with me, and that's the fun of being a human being, being careful about what we call a practice, and that maybe that might be one way to start tearing down some of the walls that separate us off from other people, and also tearing down some of the walls in ourselves that make us feel we are subservient to this thing which is bigger than us. The practice is bigger than us, and I need to be subservient to it. Because guess what? This practice was created by human beings. It was, you know, you're not going to find the primary sequence in the Vedas anywhere. It was created by a person, and that person had flaws, and the person before that person had flaws also, because they were born. So, so that's just a thought I had during the course of this conversation. I wanted to share it as my final closing remark and give great thanks to Adam for the amazing work he's doing to bring people together, to have honest and open conversations about things that are on our minds. So I appreciate you very much for Adam. I appreciate you, Adam, very much for that. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Eddie, and thanks everyone, all of you, for coming on and taking this time. I realize we've run over time a little bit. I totally agree. I think ultimately, I was asking someone recently, a friend of mine, and saying, you know, who's taught a long time, what is this yoga for you now? You can't do it so well, and you know, like you know, it's gone on a long time already. And he said, well, you know, essentially, it's a lifestyle. You know, it's a way of living. And I think, you know, if we look at a religious studies teacher when I was a kid said to me, the definition of religion is a way of walking. And I looked it back and it's actually rebinding, isn't it? But I love that, the idea of a way of walking and a way of, because we've got no context in life anymore. We've got no sense of, you know, like ritual and routine. And I think a practice, and I think that's a fantastic kind of ending note that Eddie's given me and the opportunity to talk about it. A practice, a lifestyle, a way of living kind of brings back a context in life and brings us back to daily life, because it's in the mundane that we need to find our meaning. In the daily life, we need to find our meaning. And now we're looking at excitement all the time as a sense of trying to get our meaning out of, you know, like hyper non-normal life. But, you know, like life is daily life. That's where we live our daily life. And we have the peak experiences, but it's, you know, so we have to find and put the profound back into the mundane, and you know, and that's through ritual and routine, I think. And that's the a practice as a lifestyle, or just kind of getting up, as Michael said, you know, like if you're someone like me as well, you have the anxiety in the morning or the thoughts in the morning, you know, get up, okay, let's break that cycle, you know, and start afresh again. And we have the opportunity with a practice to kind of every day start afresh again, you know. So, well, anyway, we've run a little bit over time, but you know, I thank you so much for taking the time, everyone, to and all the people that joined this talk to listen to it, and thanks guys for doing this, and let's think about questions in the chat box for next year's. Thanks again, everyone.